Hello, class. It's Professor Frank Henry Allah, and this is a continuation of the neighborhood and built environment lecture. And so we're going to answer the question, what is a neighborhood? So a neighborhood is any area where people live and interact with one another. There's different types of neighborhood. We have urban communities, right? And this is usually found within inner cities. This is typically where like downtown areas where you'll see big buildings, you'll see a lot of more traffic, less green spaces, a lot more apartments in these areas as opposed to houses, large buildings and so forth, and those are considered urban areas. Suburbs are areas outside of urban areas, and in these areas, you'll see more green spaces, you'll see more houses as opposed to apartments. It's usually less crowded compared to urban communities. So these are the two main types of communities. The characteristics of a neighborhood, usually the boundaries are very unclear about where exactly a neighborhood starts and finishes, at least to the common person. Mind you, the city has maps, they map out these neighborhoods so they know exactly the boundaries. But for the normal resident, for the normal person asking, what neighborhood is this? Normally, it's not set by specific boundaries. Sometimes there's big streets, and usually those streets define, like, if you go cross this street or that street, that defines the neighborhood. But typically neighborhoods are really defined by the people who live there, right? The residents. Typically people who live in the same areas have the same family structures, same income levels or similar income levels, education levels, housing preference, and also a sense of public order. And when I say public order, it's those unspoken rules within a neighborhood that you only know from being a part of that neighborhood. Like, you might not go to that certain store after a certain hour, or you might not go to a certain area or hang out in a certain place after a certain hour because you know of something that may occur wherever it may be. So there's a sense of public order and how people act. Certain things are acceptable in this neighborhood that are not acceptable in that neighborhood. Um, and typically, the neighborhood is defined by ethnicity. Remember, we talked about race. And remember, race is a social construct, meaning that um, it was really built on how people view you, right? Like the color of your skin. Remember, like when the census first began, white people, it was only white, black people were considered one third, and then Native Americans, they referred to Indians at that time, they only were considered a race, or so to speak, or a person, if they were contributing members to society, like if they paid taxes and so forth. But that was more so based off of what you look like, right? Ethnicity is more so characteristics, culture, languages, religions, or history that people share. So it's a better determinant of who someone is as opposed to race. And so what we notice in these neighborhoods, immigrants coming in from a new country tend to cluster in similar areas. You may or may not have heard of like Little Italy in Chinatown. We have ours here in LA. We have a Chinatown, but we have to recognize that this is all over the place. Like, so just like there's Chinatown over here, there's also Chinatown elsewhere too. Here's some examples of predominantly neighborhoods that are predominantly like one ethnicity. So like Harlem is really known for its African Americans. LA, California, the Chinatown is joined by Little Synagogue, and that is a lot of Vietnamese people there. Minneapolis and Minnesota, we see Somalians there. So a lot of these neighborhoods were built also based on racial residential segregation, right? So we learned about that when we talked about redlining. And these practices where if you were in one neighborhood, you pretty much have to stay there. Even the separate but equal practices where Black people were not able to live or go in certain spaces that white people were able to go to. And actually, really, it's people of color as a whole. So it wasn't just Black people; it was just people of color as a whole. Um, so residential segregation is literally the separation of races. And a lot of times you'll hear um, terms like the ghetto. Ghettos is where low income urban neighborhoods populated by members of a minority group, and barrios are urban neighborhoods populated primarily by Spanish speaking people. And that's it for um, this question.